every organism grows and develops. Some will stagnate and die. Businesses exist in time and space, and they have different resource needs at different times and different outputs depending on their stage. On the left, you can see the classic startup life cycle. So a company launches, it starts to build, it releases product, reaches a product market gap, and this is what Clayton Christensen in his famous book, Crossing the Chasm, talks about. And if the company can successfully bridge it, then it can start to scale and tackle adjacent markets and then eventually become mature. And the important thing to note is that it has resource needs that change along the way. So below the success growth chart are companies' resource needs. This is a proverbial hockey stick chart. And the resource needs are significant at the start, and they come from investment from founders or external sources. And then eventually the business can stand on its own and get its own food and grow to mature stages and hopefully IPO. But in reality, it's way more bumpy than this, and most companies come close to failure many times in their life cycle, and also most businesses fail or exit or do both along the way. And so on the right, I chose a pictorial of the life cycle of a woman specifically to exemplify this. Her resource needs and outputs change along the way, but not only does she grow, she'll often create children. And even the ones that fail do this. And our company actually came from the failure of a Silicon Valley company, and it's kind of a Phoenix Reborn story. And so from the failure came, a completely new company that is seeing some success now. So now we can come on to adaptations and how the adaptations work in the context of the organism and the ecosystem. And adaptations are characteristics that allow us to occupy and stay in a niche. They determine fitness, survivability, and ultimately success. So some of these are in our control, such as strategy, tactics, burn rate, culture, which is who you surround yourself with, including advisors. And in the early days, that's very, very crucial. Especially for us, it was a really, really big deal. And also the characteristics you choose for the product to fit in the marketplace. There's also many things that are not in your control, like market forces, obviously, but there's also regulatory, such as bureaucracy. For us, it was like NASA flight certifications or ISO. And also there's system shocks, like what we're experiencing now, which is COVID. It destroyed some businesses and allowed others to thrive. And why is that? There's a lot of stories to tell there. But the key takeaway here is that adaptations need to be both resilient and flexible. So if your adaptation only works under perfect conditions, the business won't last long. And so I want to leave this with a point from the famous talk by Richard Hamming. He's one of the fathers of numerical computing and signal processing, and he gave a talk at Bell Labs in '86 called You and Your Research. And he talked about how to set yourself up to produce impactful work at the level of the Nobel Prize. And I highly recommend reading this transcript if you have time. There's a link there. And he said basically that you should plant acorns to become great oak trees. And what he meant by this is that you want to try and be in a position to let luck happen to you. This applies both to individuals as well as organizations. And this will enhance your fitness ultimately. Okay, so now we can move specifically into adaptations. There's a second part of the talk. And these are the elements that let us grab and hold on to a niche. So as a founder, everything starts from you. Your adaptations and hopes and dreams set the stage for how you occupy the niche and are the most important things to sort out first in your journey. So I can't emphasize enough that you need to know who you are inside and out. So, I talked about being an immigrant earlier. That's an important part of who I am and how I see the world uniquely. I'm also an applied physicist interested in blue sky problems, high impact problems, and also a systems thinker. And I love the leverage of tools because they provide leverage for users. So if I do a small amount of work, other people can do more. And so these help me to be like the Michael Jordan of making science instruments. And if you pick a specific area to be in, try and be the Michael Jordan of your arena. And so let's take the case of the hedgehog versus the fox. There are more hedgehogs than foxes, and hedgehogs are really good at surviving. But foxes often get more glory, but the important thing to note here is that they're both successful. So, identify your survival model. Do you want to do the slow and steady high for survival burn, or do you want to burn brightly and move fast like a fox? Are you a wave catcher, or are you, a hunker down and wait for the opportunity type of person? For the latter, I would say, take your time to get there because it really takes time to fill a niche. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So if you know who you are, then you also want to make sure you're playing in the right arena. And in the business sense, this means competing in the right markets. And keep in mind that market may change throughout your business lifecycle. So an example of this is Mochi's product line. So one of our products is the world's first portable electron microscope. This is the Mochi, and it provides chemical identification and spectroscopy in a compact package for the first time. Normally, these instruments are really big. They take up the size of a garage, and they're very expensive, like multiple millions, and we're making it affordable too. So we're choosing not to compete head-to-head with other laboratory electron microscopes because they're big, bulky, expensive, hard to use, like I said. And instead, we choose to compete in the portable instruments landscape where there is almost no competition. We prefer to join other field analyzers who have chemical ID, but they don't have imaging. So we provide new capability. So this makes us strong where the others are relatively weak. And we, for example, we chose to put a lot of resources into supporting the space program. There are 0 electron microscopes and almost no microscopes at all in space. And in that case, there's portability, instant results, easy remote operation. All of those are critical. And in the space environment, they exemplify Mochi's value. So the take home here is to swim in the right pond. Another important advantage is what I call what's called niche diversification. And we use this a lot. So what I want to say here is that a company doesn't need to be beautiful. It needs to survive, and it needs to thrive. So be a barnacle. Barnacles survive when the tide is in or is out. They can live anywhere. So, most startup wisdom is to be strong at only one thing. This is something that venture capitalists tell you because they're diversified. They have a portfolio of companies doing one thing, so they don't care if 1 out of 20 fails. They don't care if 18 out of 20 fails, as long as one becomes a unicorn. But if you're the founder or the person who's trying to get something done, you're the execution person, there's only one of you. And sometimes being strong at multiple things is a huge adaptation in and of itself. So we use this like crazy at Voxa. We have 2 different product lines from the same technology stack, and they feed virtuously into each other. So the different product lines are anti-correlated. We sell both at the bottom and the top of the market spectrum for imaging. At the bottom, the Mochi, it serves field operations. And then at the top, it's big installations in the lab. One is manual imaging, the other is automated, completely automated, ultra high throughput. They use similar technologies on the back end, and they share the same cloud infrastructure, so we can share the resources. But we're serving different parts of a market that are anti-correlated. They're strong at different types of the year. They cater to different clientele and allow cash flow during development cycles, downturns, and provide new points of view. So this approach has allowed us to bootstrap the company with less external funding, but also, enriching our capabilities. And another biological equivalent is that we're like omnivores. We can eat both plants and meat, and that helps our survivability. Another adaptation is product differentiation. This is in your control, and its biological analog is rapid speciation. So you can introduce a mutation into an organism in a niche, and if it allows you to survive better, it propagates. So you might end up looking very different from how you started. So in biology, there's a lot of examples. Like number 1 is like an invasive species. Blackberries benefit us with delicious fruit, yet they're incredibly successful growing everywhere, and their barbs also make them really resistant to remove. So they found a niche and they just entered it, and you can't pull them out. And they're everywhere. There's also evolutionary divergence, and that's the example of cats. Cats share a common ancestor, but they end up with really different shapes depending on evolutionary pressures, environment pressures, depending on their niche. And finally, there's niche speciation, which is related. So in the case of finches, they've developed very different beak variants and allow them to get food more successfully depending on their environment. So these changes happen very, very fast and are linked to survival. And the startup analog is rapid pivots. They're a form of speciation. So you can't do them too much, otherwise you waste resources. But if you do them the right way, then you'll end up really different from how you were, but you will also potentially be very successful. In the business case, I want to point out, and this was something that happened to us, it's because you don't know what the threshold is for the survival. It's important not just to be better, you have to have a huge lead. So in our Blade product line, this is our high-end product line, which provides brain tissue scans very quickly. We chose not to just be 10 times faster. We chose to be 1,000,000 times faster than the standard workflow, and also recently to become like 1,000 times more reliable. And we achieve this through automation and removal of users and good engineering. And this has made it unmistakable that we're better than anything out there. And that makes us very difficult to remove, even though we're still small, difficult to remove from the niche. In our Mochi product, there's an analog as well. We made the product portable and easier to use. So we didn't just improve on one factor, we improved on multiple factors. And hopefully that's enough to get it over the threshold. So if you make it a lot better, the market will draw the product out of you instead of you having to push it in. Culture, as an adaptation, is, in my view, the biggest advantage you can have. And I think a lot of people share in this view. Values and mission act in a virtuous loop. The culture flows from the CEO and founders and is exemplified by the team. So a great example from biology is the Rose of Jericho. In periods of drought, this unique plant, it goes into hibernation, kind of like a tumbleweed, and it looks like it's dead. But when the conditions are good and water is plenty, it blooms back again to its glorious self. It's this beautiful thing. And these are really cool. You can buy these on the internet, and they're really neat to show the kids. This is a perfectly reversible process and can be done again and again. It's very resilient. And what culture enables for you is to fight the right fights. Sometimes, management bandwidth is limited, and you can't communicate exactly what to do at every single time. But culture enables everyone in the company to row in the right direction. And sometimes, in this sense, groupthink is actually really great when you're small and in the context of niching, because it helps you to focus on making the right choices at the right time. So there's many great examples in business. For example, at Apple, user privacy is super critical, and you see these fights with the federal government for releasing user data, and they stand their line on it because it's built into the company. Another example is the Taj Mahal Palace and Tower terrorist attack in 2008. In that case, this is in India, and employees at that hotel put their lives at risk to save their guests. They didn't have to do this; they could have just run away, but they actually, got in the line of fire, waited for the guests. And what does it take from a culture standpoint in a business to provide, that level of service that the employees are willing to risk their lives for the customer? A third example is SpaceX. It's a great example because, they blew up a half a dozen rockets, totaling billions of dollars in investment, and they just keep going. It's part of their culture to fail and try again. For us at Voxa, delighting the customer and uncompromising technical achievement are key cultural elements, and that helps us always, produce the right product that really reflects our values, and that helps us to niche.